Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Hart HPWL06 20-volt hybrid magnet light. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the base of the tool. Now there are several different features here to talk about, and we're going to start off with the, magnets. Now the magnets that they're using in this particular light are super rare earth magnets, or the neodymium magnets, which are very good, and they do a good job of keeping the light wherever you are mounting it. They're very strong, and I don't really have any complaints. You should be aware that they are mounted flush, but there's always a chance that this could scratch whatever you have it mounted to, so just be careful if you're trying to put it on something that you don't wish to, scratch up. So the magnets on this particular light I think are very good. There are 4 of them, and there really isn't anything wrong with them. It works best when you mount it on a flat surface, such as the side of a filing cabinet or a shipping container that has a flat side. Any sort of ridges or anything that disrupts the magnets will make it so that the light really can't stay in place, so just make sure you're mounting it on a flat, surface. And, like I said earlier, I think it does a fairly good job. And, even with a large battery, it's on there solidly, and it doesn't come off easily. It's not impossible to pull off, but it's not going to get blown off in a strong wind. So I do think the magnets are good, and I think they do a good job of keeping the light in place. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next part of the base of the tool. Okay, next up we have the nail or screw mounting holes, and quite frankly, it's a fine showing here. It's a 4-way directional hole, so it's fairly easy to get your screws or nails into the hole, and as long as you have them all properly spaced, it does just fine holding them up. I use typically, the standard deck screw or framing nail, and they both work fine for, being a mounting point for this particular light. I think on a lot of lights, sometimes I make these holes too small, but on this particular light, I think they did a good job, so no complaints here. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the tripod mounting hole. It uses a standard 1/4-inch tripod thread, and quite frankly, it works. I'm not too, fond of where they placed this particular mounting hole. I wish it was a little bit further back, but, then that might interfere with the battery or what size battery you can use with this, so I can understand why they did it. I just don't think it's as well balanced as it could be, but, it is still functional and it still gets the job done. It just is definitely a little, unbalanced with a larger battery. So just something to be aware of, still fully functional, but I think it could use a little bit of a redesign. Okay, next up we have the AC power port. Now, this uses a standard, 120, outlet style design, and quite frankly, it needs some improvement also. The problem is that the hole isn't exactly big enough for you to easily be able to plug in any extension cord. I tried 2 different extension cord, and one was just too tall on both the top and bottom, and it just would not go in no matter what I tried, or no matter how I tried to finagle it in. I think that particular brand was a Sunjo power cord, and this next one was, I believe it's a 3-headed Hyper Tough, extension cord, and I was able to get the 3-pronged or the 3-headed Hyper Tough extension cord to plug right in. So you may have to have a different extension cord or a short extension cord in order to use this particular light. So, I do wish that the hole was a little bit bigger, and this is definitely something that could be modified by the user, but it would probably void your warranty. So, this is a little bit of a disappointment. When it comes to overall function when using the power cord, I didn't notice really any major, changes to the overall capabilities of the light. So, it's just another way of powering the light. The cord did stay plugged in once I had it plugged in, and it did not fall free easily, so you shouldn't have to worry about your extension cords falling out constantly if you are using the extension cord to power the light. So, pretty good showing there, at least. Okay, so next up we have, the battery slot, and it's a pretty, decent showing. It will use any of Hart's 20-volt batteries, and, while I would normally say you could adapt batteries over, as far as I know, nobody really makes adapters that you can use other tool brand batteries in Hart tools, so, you're going to be stuck with what Hart has. Now, this will fit any of Hart's 20-volt batteries, so, they're 1.5, they're 2s, they're 4s, and 6-volt, 6 amp hour batteries, and, for the most part, it's a pretty good showing. The tightness or fit is not the best, but it's not the worst either. There's definitely some play, but I haven't had any issues with the battery coming free or with the power being interrupted to the light. So, it gets the job done. I have dropped the light with a battery in it, and the battery stayed in place. So, really no complaints there. So, as far as I'm concerned, the battery slot is acceptable. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the, well, hinges and tilt rotation on this particular light. And while it's been a pretty good showing for the most part so far, there are some problems in this department, unfortunately, with this particular light. Now, the overall functionality of the tilting mechanisms and rotation mechanisms are acceptable enough. They're using a screwless system, which is basically just, a couple of O-rings around plastic in order to keep the light from turning or rotating, which means it can wear out, but you can buy more O-rings and replace them. So, it is a repairable system, and this also means you can't over-tighten it. But the problem was when I first got this light, the O-rings weren't tight enough, so I had to wrap the plastic in some electrical tape, then put the O-rings on, and then, everything worked just fine. Now, I think that was just a bad batch. I don't think that's necessarily a reflection of all these particular lights, and from what my understanding is, most of the newer lights, it works just fine. My big issue here is the rotation of the headlamp. You can turn it around in circles 2 or 3 times, and then the wires inside will become disconnected or, well, ripped. There's no hard rotation stop on the rotation of the light, and, if that's the case and you rotate too far, sometimes you won't know right away until you try turning off the light, and when you can't turn off the light, well your, controls for the power have become disconnected or ripped, and you will have to open the light up to do some repairs. As you can see in the video right now, I'm pressing the button, and the light's not turning off or cycling through the different modes. So what happens when that's the case? Well, you'll have to open the light up, which isn't difficult. There's about 6 to 8 screws, and once you get the light open, hopefully all that's happened is that one of the connectors has, well, pulled free, and that should hopefully just mean that you just need to reconnect, well, the connector. But there's always the possibility that the housing for the female end of the connector might have become detached, and that's going to be a much more complicated repair, or the wire might have ripped, and you will have to do some soldering and some splicing. This isn't really something that should be, allowed. I really think that there needs to be a hard stop. I can understand why they didn't have a hard stop, but this is the sort of thing that can easily happen, and if you lose track on how many times you've rotated the head, or if you have the kids that like to play with your power tools or something like that, or, just a kid hanging out with you while you're working on something and they're just, spinning the head, it's going to cause some permanent damage. Well, it could cause some permanent damage. So, this is something I think that they need to address. I think that this is something that needs, some attention, but at the end of the day, at least it's using a connector where the wire can pull free, so all you have to do is, open it up and hook it back together. But it isn't something that you should have to do. There needs to be a, hard stop here. So this is an area of the tool that definitely needs some improvement. And it does take a little while for you to, well, get everything back together, and it takes you even longer when you're trying to film it, and that's why I ended up, not filming the whole process, because it was just, I couldn't do it and film at the same time. It just, I had to get in front of the light and in front of the camera. So, it is possible to repair, but, it isn't, something that you should have to do. I don't think this necessarily detracts from the overall value of the product. I just think that, it's something that you need to be aware of, and I really hope that, they quietly do a fix, and maybe the newest models have fixed this. I've had this light for about a year now, and, I haven't gotten any of the recent, I haven't bought one of these lights recently, so they might have, patched it quietly like Ryobi does. So, just something to be aware of. If you rotate the light too much, then, well, you could end up with some damage. So, just be conscious of how many times you rotate the head, and always, when you rotate it one way, make sure you rotate it back the other way in order to put it back into the storage position. So, just something to be aware of. FYI. Moving on. Okay, the last thing that kind of annoys me about the whole rotation thing is the fact that it binds up on the back of the light. I think that if they'd come out with a little bit better design where there was a little bit more room in between the resting position on the back and the front of the light, or if they made it a little bit slimmer and they didn't have this cutout, whatever the case might have been, if they'd made this a little bit narrower, it would be easier to rotate the light, thus making it easier to get the light where you need it to be when you have it on, say hanging on the side of a filing cabinet or toolbox or car hood. I don't know. This just is another area of the tool that could probably use some improvement, and so this is just another little bit of an annoyance. It's fairly easy to work around, and you will get used to it eventually. It just, when you first get the tool, it's a little bit annoying. So, this is another area of the tool that could use some improvement, but, it's not a deal breaker either. Okay, next up we have the, well, LED panel itself. Now the LED panel is comprised of, LED beads on top of a white reflector with a plastic cover, and for the most part it's a pretty good showing. There are 3 different brightness settings. You have the high setting, which is 1500 lumens, a medium setting, and then a low setting, and then the off position. It's a simple cycle through switch without any sort of hidden features or functions. Now when it comes to the overall, quality of the light that it's producing, it's very neutral. It's a very nice, even white light, which is going to be great for making sure you have your accurate colors if you're doing a painting project, or if you just like, natural looking, or the correct color being projected from whatever you're illuminating. So, it's a pretty good showing here. The light does slowly fade from, each different power setting. It takes about a second and a half to get to the next, power setting, but it's a dimming function, or it's a dimming fade, so it actually makes it feel like it's a little bit higher quality of the light. So it's not a downside. It's just, it doesn't just do it instantaneously. It takes the second. So at the end of the day, I don't really have any complaints about the overall functionality of the light, and you shouldn't have any major issues with shattered or broken glass since it's using a transparent plastic cover. So yep, it's a pretty simple setup. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the carrying handle, and for the most part it's a pretty good showing here. Now the carrying handle is actually multifunctional. It is a collapsible handle. It's completely made out of plastic, but there are some cool features here. I'm actually very, fond of carrying handles on lights. There are a lot of work lights in the market that don't have carrying handles, and those lights I tend to, well, drop fairly often. So having a carrying handle means that you're less likely to drop the light. The handle does have soft blocking positions. It's not a hard lock. It's just like little raised ridges that you kind of pop past or pull past, or push onto in order to keep the handle either extended or pushed down. It works just fine. No real complaints there either. And it's fairly easy to pull free or push down. So I think all that works acceptable enough. Now when it comes to the overall design here, I think it's actually pretty innovative. Now, not only do you have a carrying handle that's collapsible, but you also have the ability to, well, use it as a 2x4 clamp, which if you've done any sort of framing construction, you'll know how useful and just how, effective this particular lighting strategy can be. Or even if you have an unfinished basement, or an attic that still has bare rafters, this can be incredibly useful, and I really do like this particular function, and the clamping function works extremely well. The light will not fall off easily, and quite frankly I think there really are no complaints when it comes to the clamping function there. And of course there are also some little indentations on either side of the handle that have a little point where you can mount this on a line, say if you're camping, or you just have some clothes hanging line or something, so you can use it as a hanging light as well in that regard. So very innovative handle, and I think they did a very good job here. So with that being said, let's move on. Okay, now I'm not quite sure what happened to my regular scale, but the light does weigh, well, 1 second, technical difficulties, please stand by. Okay, now the light does weigh about 2.91 pounds without a battery, which is, not the lightest light on the market, but it's not too bad either. And with a 4 amp hour battery, the light is going to weigh right at 4.26 pounds. So, it's a fairly, average weight work light. So no real complaints there either. Moving on. Okay, let's go ahead and compare this light against a couple other work lights and see how it comes out against other, competitors that are on the market, or were on the market. I don't know, things keep changing. First up, we have a Ryobi work light, which is going to be a little bit more powerful than the Hart light that we're currently reviewing, but only by 300 lumens. Overall, the Ryobi work light is doing a fairly good job of illuminating the shipping container in the distance, which is about 25 to 30 feet away from the current table that I'm on top of. Well, it's actually more of a wagon with a tabletop, but it is what it is. So overall, the Ryobi is doing a fairly decent job, but it's not the best in the world either. Next up, we have a work light I got off of Amazon haul for a penny. No, like literally it cost me a penny. It was some weird promotion they were doing, and I basically actually got 3 of them for a penny. It was a really good deal. But overall it's not really a light I reach for when I'm working on a project, because none of the lighting options are even, and it works okay as a distance light, but it definitely is going to burn through your battery quicker. I don't know. It's a jack of all trades, master of none type light. Overall, it's okay. I Don't really use it though. Next up we have, well, the Hart light. Now the Hart light is actually doing a very good job of providing even illumination on the side of the shipping container. It's not quite as bright as the first Ryobi light, but for the most part it's still a fairly good show here. So, I think it's doing a pretty good job, and that even work light is something I've really come to appreciate. There's no hot spots or areas that are super, much brighter. It's all pretty even, and it's a nice, white light. So, I think the Hart light is actually doing an excellent job, and I don't really have any complaints whatsoever about the illumination that it's able to provide. It's a little bit on the dim side at only 1,500 lumens, but that's actually fairly good for a 20 volt powered light. So, not too bad at the end of the day. Okay, here's a couple more examples of the light in action. Here we have the light in operation inside of a shipping container. The other end of the shipping container is about 20 feet away, and it's providing more than enough work or light for you to work by, and it's doing a pretty good job. The different brightness levels are indicated obviously by the dimming of the light, and really I don't think it has any major downsides to its capabilities here in this particular scenario. So let's move on. Okay, here we have the light being operated inside of a portable garage, and for the most part, it's a fairly decent showing. It's definitely, dealing with a little bit wider area. It's definitely a little bit dimmer, but there's still more than enough light to work by, and it's doing a good job of illuminating the entire 20-foot, deep structure of the garage. The garage is about, 12 feet wide, and so, it's doing a pretty good job of just illuminating the whole interior of the, garage here. So, really no complaints, and I think it works fairly well. With that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, the first pro is dual power. Being able to use this with your Hart 20 volt batteries or an AC power cord is a very nice feature, and definitely a pro in my opinion. The next pro is 5 different mounting options. You can either hang this on a line, by a 2x4, on a tripod, or you can put it on nails, or, well, basically hang it by the magnet. So you have 5 different options to hang this light. 3 modes. I don't like too many modes, and this has just the right amount. You have your high, medium, and low. So in my opinion, that's a pro. White light. I like lights that have neutral white colored light, and this provides. It's not too warm, it's not too cool, it's just right. Even light. There are no hot spots or areas of the light that are just brighter. It's all even, and in my opinion, that's a pro. Carrying handle. The carrying handle means that you can easily carry this. You can use it to mount it on 2x4s, or you can hang it off lines, and it's also collapsible, which means it also makes it, smaller for storage. So in my opinion, this is a pro. Tilt hinge. The tilt hinge is okay, but quite frankly, it came a little bit loose, and I had to do some modifications to make it better, and it also seems to bind up. So I think this is an area of the light that could use some improvements in the future. No rotation hard stop. This is an area of the light that could use some improvement. The fact that there's no hard stop means that you can turn the light too far in one direction, causing the wires to become either disconnected or to snap. So this is an area of the tool that could probably use some improvement. But as long as you're being careful, you shouldn't have any issues. And last but not least, the AC cord port. It's not a horrible port. Some extension cords will work right out of the box. There are other extension cords that are just too thick to fit in there. If the hole had been a little bit bigger, it would just be a better design. But, it is what it is. So just be aware that, some extension cords will work, some extension cords won't work. So it is what it is. Moving on. And that's it. What are my final thoughts on this particular light? Overall, I do like this particular light. I do like the light panel that they're using, and I like all the different ways that you're able to mount or hang or, well, use this particular light. I do think there are areas that could use some drastic improvements, but at the end of the day, I don't think you're going to regret too much, the money you spend on this particular light. Just be aware that you need to be careful when rotating the head, and also just, be aware that, this isn't going to be the overall best light on the market, but for the price, it's not horrible either, especially in today's world. It provides plenty of illumination, and the fact that you can power it with either an extension cord or a battery means that this can be a very versatile product. So, at the end of the day, this light does come recommended as long as you are aware of its shortcomings. So, with that being said, we'll see you all next time. God bless.